what I'm sitting with today is, what if there's no problem to be solved? Even where we perceive a problem to be, the problem is created in us. And I'm referring to a series of stories that were shared with me in the last 24 hours. One was a blog post written by a sophomore, I think, at Palo Alto High School about the recent suicide by a fellow high school student at a different high school in Palo Alto. And this high school is notorious for having several of these same types of suicides jumping in front of trains each year. And the predominant demographic is Chinese American. And the folklore is that the suicides are related to pressure to perform. And of course, it's sort of getting stale, this story of Asian kids having all this pressure to perform, and you never know how much of that is just speculated because people can only see what's shared, and typically these kids are not sharing, or whether it's, to what extent it's true. And so this blog post I thought was very insightful for a 15-year-old. He talked about how people try to explain this phenomenon and try to assign blame or responsibility with the school or Caltrain or with parents or with culture or whatever. And he sort of unpacks it, and two of the powerful images that stuck with me are, when people ask, can we get to the root of this problem? He says, it's not just one root. It's like a tree that has many roots that are interconnected, and there's not just one root for this problem. And so he references the interconnectedness of all things, that we see one phenomenon that is actually one node in a complex system interacting many different points. And our mind likes to find a linear cause and be able to just surgically remove it or repair it, and it really is much more interrelated. And the second insight he had was about male sociology or male psychology in our culture, which is about stuffing your feelings and looking tough and never showing that you're having difficulty. And that he called for a reversal of that through something that he calls the mirror image of feminism for men. And I smiled because I've just been exposed to the work of Warren Farrell, who wrote The Myth of Male Power and Why Men Are the Way They Are, and really is credited with being the founder of the men's movement, having been on the only male on the board of the National Organization for Women, and then leaving that to start the men's movement, which is exactly what this boy blogger describes as being the reclaiming of men's rights, and seeing how the facade of male power has really been the expression of powerlessness in men, which most women don't want to look at, frankly, because it's more fun to stay on the side of the equation that gets wronged. So we have something to complain about, that they did it, that the male culture did this to us. And it's just a lot more righteous to be on this side. And yet, when a man goes into his heart and shares his own experience of being a man, and we listen, we really, my experience is I can't deny the ways in which the culture has perpetuated the powerlessness that leads men to seek false expressions of power. what solutions there are, I have no idea. Again, it's what if, let's transcend describing it as a problem, and let's just be with it and see it for what it is first. So going back to the suicides, I recalled an event earlier, maybe 6 months ago, where a friend shared that his Chinese brother-in-law's son, so his nephew and his brother-in-law, both died in a suicide. Well, it was the son, what I just learned was it was the son's suicide and the father's attempt to save that son's life that took both their lives. And that the explanation, at least through this friend, was the son's, he was 17, his disappointment in only getting into his second or third choice of university, not getting into the Stanford or whatever the number one choice was. I have no idea. The second choice was some UC school, like, I don't know whether it was Berkeley or whatever, or UCLA or Davis. Anyway, it was this, whatever it was a distorted thinking, and yet so real to that person as to convey and prove his unworthiness of living. And every time these stories are brought up, they dredge up old memories of when I was told this, and how I ended up on the lucky side because I actually had the aptitude or the will to achieve at school, the will to suppress whatever it took to suppress and get through and be perfect. And I don't know whether to congratulate myself about that or not. That's just the way I got through life. And when I hear these stories of people who have a different constitution, perhaps greater sensitivity, greater permeability, less of a will to suppress, who actually take in these messages and start identifying with them, and then when the external doesn't prove the model, they're left in a state of, well, then I'm not worth anything. And we're told that. Let's just face it. Let's be really honest as Chinese people, that there's language. There are words in our language that tell people that they're worth nothing or that they're useless. And these are words that exist in the culture because they've been said over generations. Whether it was to a woman, to a girl when their baby girl is born, or whether it's to a son who doesn't prove himself to be, to pull his weight economically in the village or whatever. It's passed down, it's genetic, it's in our language, it's in our lineage, it's maybe it's a source of shame, like as the words are coming out of our mouth, we're actually not even aware of where it's coming from. That's not an excuse anymore. And I'm here, I'm sitting with this and saying, how do I come to the balanced view of not making it wrong, not making it a problem, but also revealing that there's another level of awakening that can be attained, that can be touched and lived through and in. And, the insanity of the same story happening over and over again with this same demographic can be addressed beyond simply retelling the story and those families only having their own grief to endure. So, my question is, what can those families learn and share? What is required for those families to learn and share? And how does my voice add any value, if at all, to any conversation that's happening? So when I shared this blog post with my friend, because I thought of them, And he had mentioned when he shared the news back in the fall about his nephew that he'd like to talk to me about this. So I shared it and I said, you mentioned that you want to talk to me about this, so here I am sharing this story and let's get together. And his response was that he didn't recall having asked me, which is fine. And he did share a very detailed account of how this story unfolded, which he's not Chinese. His wife is, and his brother-in-law obviously is Chinese. And several things in his account of it were very revealing to me. And one was that there was a very strong sense that no one wanted to talk about inside family private matters outside. So seeking help from somebody, even if it's a licensed professional, that's not the issue. It's not about that. It's even talking to anyone outside the family about what's going on in your family is considered totally forbidden or shameful or just the same as committing suicide. So, I mean, it would have been worse to open up to a stranger than to endure the loss of a son. And then, it's reinforced throughout. That's very much respected. That's a boundary that everyone obeys. It's a rule that everyone believes in. And, this non-Chinese friend of mine who wanted to take his nephew out to lunch or just have a conversation with him, reach out, reach in, it was totally not allowed. And I'm recalling a moment in my life when I was in medical school and I was really suffering in terms of a lot of bitterness, and I didn't like anybody who was around me. I didn't want to be there. I was getting through and I just wanted everyone to get out of my way and just let me do what I needed to do. So I was not a very good team member in most cases. And for some reason I was having a conversation with the counselor. It might have had to do with, there was 1 month. I mean, I got okay grades in medical school, but there was 1 month where I just had zero respect for any of the team that I was working with in terms of the residents, and I just thought it was a big joke. And I made no attempt to play along. I just had the worst attitude ever. And so that was apparent, and that was it, in my evaluation. I don't think they failed me because I did show up and do the work, but it was just hell for everyone. So they wrote that up, and I think I got called in for that, to talk about that. And I remember just feeling so justified in my resentment and my anger, and I'm like, basically when I recall it, the situation was, I'm giving everything of myself to just be here, so don't make me like it. It's sort of the thing like, I didn't choose, so I don't have to pretend that I like it. It's like more than enough that I'm just showing up. And the counselor really was trying to reach in and ask some kind of deeper emotional questions about that. Like, okay, if you don't really want to be here, why are you here? And I think he touched on, is it about your parents? And at that moment, I just snapped, and because he'd touched the truth of my story that I'd been suppressing. And I just said, at that point, I think I said, you have no right to talk to me this way. It's none of your business. And I just left, and I just had no further contact with him. At the time, I didn't want to confront. I mean, it took all of my energy to focus on getting through this experience that I did not want to be in. So for him to dig around in there was just like, no. And so what I'm recalling is it also probably touched that old genetic code in me that says you don't talk about your internal issues with this outsider. You don't talk about family stuff with somebody that's not in your family, let alone a white person. So that was definitely one of the things that was touched at the time. Here I am doing a video that's going on the internet. So obviously I've done some work to dissolve that rule and move through it. But as I'm speaking, I also realize that what I'm doing by kind of being the provocateur in the world of medicine and writing to doctors about failure and creativity and imagination and choice is a little bit like stirring the pot and touching the same way that that counselor did with me. It's like the first response is going to be, get away from me, don't touch me, because it's taking all of my energy to maintain this shell. So it occurred to me, so this process of putting out the program has been so rich with learning for me, because tonight, in fact, I launch it with a teleclass entitled Allowing Change. So I'm doing a series of 6 classes about the process of change, the nature of change, and navigating change. And the first component is allowing, and it's big. It's not even just like one class. I just had to start somewhere, but allowing takes everything off the table. It's like so many of us have built lives around not allowing things to come in, not allowing love to be received, not allowing feeling to happen, not allowing desires to be acknowledged and expressed or fulfilled. Most of us have a lot more experience in not allowing than in allowing. So, everything is happening for me in the exact timing. So this whole issue around suicide and me wanting to somehow use my voice in some way, of some benefit, in some conversation around the insanity of the insanity and the waking up to the possibility of sanity and the depth of the genetic imprinting of these patterns that came from, we don't know where they came from. It doesn't matter. But let's just recognize them as genetic codes that we can transform by seeing them and allowing them to transform with a certain kind of love. So love, this is where love needs to be unpacked. Love in the Chinese model, and I'm just going to say Chinese because that's my reference point. It may be much more universal than that, but I'm just going to say in the Chinese model, love is about that obligation, the secrecy, the shame, the wall. Love is the unit of currency that creates the wall of the family. Love is not this expansive evolutionary impulse that I've been talking about in Chinese culture. Love is the bond of secrecy, shame, responsibility, obligation, and merging with the belief patterns and thought forms of your genetic code. Period. So it's not surprising to me that I've rejected that word for most of my life, because love equaled a lot of pain and criticism and resentment and suppression. Love is suppression of you as an individual for the sake of this unit called the family, which is the only realm in which love exists under that model. So I have redefined love through this unfolding process that has come to me, not consciously. I didn't say, I'm going to unpack love. I just, started down my path, and what's coming to me now is, oh, maybe this is all about really what love is, not the limited cultural definition of love as the glue of a family unit and a genetic code, but love is the expansive, permissive impulse of life that's so great, so much bigger than any one culture. And this is where, love is freedom. Love is the freedom of life. And this is what I love, the Ai Weiwei. He doesn't use the word love in his exhibit. He talks about freedom. So he says, once freedom is in your heart, no one can take it away. You become more powerful than a whole country once you've tasted freedom. And I will say, to me, when you taste love as freedom, the freedom of love, real love, not family, human construct love, no one can take it away, and you become more powerful than, as powerful as the entire cosmos. And we each have that. It's about realizing it by seeing and transforming all of the human thought forms that we've attached to and believed in just because. So we can choose to wake up and expand also just because. So that's my walk today. It was really important for me to just be with all of that, and be in the trees, especially on a day when I begin this the teaching journey part of my offering. So that's all.